Okay, well, um, I guess I can go ahead and get started now, uh, unless I should wait another minute, but um, I'm really looking forward to this. So first of all, I really would like to thank the New York Flute Club for accepting to have me and to do this presentation on this really exciting piece. I don't know if some of you know the piece or perhaps have even performed it, but this is a really fantastic piece um, that is worthy to be, uh, performed everywhere by all flute players. I think Kate Soper is an incredible composer who is creating her own unique voice, very innovative, very theatrical, and highly entertaining to watch from an audience perspective, um, which you'll see at the end of my presentation. I've done a video recording since unfortunately we can't do live performances at this point. Um, so my name is, as you know, Christian Paquette. I'm originally from Canada and currently in the doctoral program at the Peabody Institute in Baltimore. And I also play principal flute in the York Symphony in York, Pennsylvania. Um, and so I'm really excited to present this piece. I'd like to thank Noelle McMurtry, who is a very good friend of mine, who is the soprano, whom you'll hear in the piece, and to Ben Giroux, who was the recording engineer and did the whole thing very last minute. We recorded it last week, so to put the video and the audio together in a week, and he was very busy as well. I'm sure he didn't sleep much this week. So, um, without further ado, I'll go ahead and screen share so you'll all see some Google slides. Okay, so making sure, in case I need sound, video clip. Okay. Um, oops, going back. Okay, so unfortunately I can't see you guys anymore, so it's a little weird. I'm just going to be talking uh, directly into my Google slides, basically. But please speak up if you can't hear me or if you're having trouble seeing the screen. Um, Otherwise, let's go ahead. So, um, only the words themselves mean what they say is a duo for soprano and flute that was written by Kate Soper, who's a New York-based composer, very young, but very up and coming. She's been winning some big awards, and I think we're going to hear a lot about her in the future. So definitely keep an eye out for her. This piece is actually the second section or second act, if you will, not that it's actually an act, of her larger work, a chamber opera entitled Ipsa Dixit. Um, and this is a work divided into six sections. So Noelle, the soprano, and I, we've grown to really love this piece as we've been performing it for the past 2 years, all throughout Baltimore and the DC area. The more we play it, the more we uncover new and interesting things about it, and really how this is a truly great work of art. But then it also brings up the question of what is art? And this is something that the whole opera dives into. The very first opening, the very first sentence proclaimed in the opera is, "What is art?" And this is in fact a quote from Aristotle's Poetics, some of his writings from his larger body of work that's known as the Corpus Aristotelicum, or just a large collection of Aristotle's writings. And these are some philosophical treatises that dive into the prevalence of mimesis within dramatic Greek tragedies of the time, and how mimesis or imitation is a fundamental component of art. So one could say that art is short for the word artificial, and that's a word that's somewhat synonymous to the word imitation. So Aristotle's work, it's still very much talked about, still garners a lot of attention to this day, thousands of years later because of its opposing critical interpretations. And these, what I would call divergent opinions, only bring us back to that same original question of what is art? And that's what we're going to kind of explore through the presentation. So here's another image of Ipsa Dixit in performance, um, as you see on your screen. So um, I would like to first present a little clip of Ipsa Dixit. And this is Kate Soper and members of her Wet Ink ensemble, which is the New York-based ensemble for whom she wrote the piece. And so this is just to give you a glimpse of, first of all, of the piece, but most importantly of Kate Soper's sound world, which I think is very unique. So this is a video that's available on YouTube, and I think all of the different 6 sections, I think the entire opera is available for anyone interested in watching more of this. So here's an excerpt of Poetics, the first section.
What is art? Art is imitation. Art is imitation, and the different arts may differ in their medium of imitation. In the music of the and of the harmony and rhythm are used, whereas in dancing only is used. Other arts use language alone, although the use of a meter in a text that is not artistic does not make its author a poet, nor does the use of more than one and that of multiple frequently altering meters quite disqualify a poet. There are some.
So that was a little excerpt of the opening. I'm sorry I have to stop it there. Otherwise we'd be here all day. So if for anyone wondering, that was the flute player was Erin Lesser, who's also New York based. And she's really good friends with Kate. In fact, this duo section, only the words, was written with Erin. I mean, Erin was kind of putting down all of Kate Soper's ideas, all of the extended techniques and gestures, how to make it possible on the flute. So Erin is very much involved in the composition of the piece, and the piece was respectfully dedicated to Erin Lesser. Wonderful person, by the way. So the piece was premiered on the 9th of December in 2016, after a 6-year gestation. I think each section was sort of written separately and then put together later on. Ipsa Dixit came to fruition as what Alex Ross from The New Yorker called, quote, a philosophy opera. It's a 90-minute opera, and it explores basically the endless ways our society perceives the definition of art. Specifically, it explores the intersections between art, language, and meaning, and how these intersections can veil the truth in many different ways. Ipsa Dixit is a play on the masculine form from the Latin expression ipse, I-P-S-E, Dixit, or which translates to he himself said it. It's a term meaning to believe in spoken words of a person of authority with generally no evidence needed. And so therefore it's oftentimes subjective or false claims that we are led to believe. Soper presents a feminist response to the Latin expression with the feminine pronoun ipsa, I-P-S-A, thus translating to she herself said it. So this second section of the opera, it exemplifies Soper's feminist response. And ironically, this brings us back to the Cassandra metaphor. Some images are on the screen here, where one's truthful claims remain disbelieved. And so this term, the Cassandra metaphor, comes from Greek mythology, of course, but it's about the prophetic Cassandra who falls victim to Apollo's curse after she refused his sexual advances. His curse therefore inhibited the belief of her prophecies, essentially rendering her voiceless. Now, unfortunately, many other sexist versions of this story exist, setting Cassandra as the victim of her own demise after breaking a promise to sleep with Apollo in return for his gift to prophesy the future. So this latter version, these uh, distorted later versions, give power and authority to her masculine counterpart, to Apollo. And it also alludes to this omnipresent hold of the patriarchy that has been weighing down on the history of art well over the past 2,000 years. So these are the texts that Kate Soper used in writing Only the Words Themselves Mean What They Say. It divides into three movements, the first one being Go Away, the second Head Heart, and the third movement entitled Getting to Know Your Body. And these are based on the text by American author Lydia Davis, whom you see here on the bottom right. Coincidentally, Davis's mother was also an American feminist author. Davis's poetry is often brief, quirky, yet profound, with multi-layered meanings, creating an interplay between the text and its reader. Soper, being a really great soprano herself, she explores these multi-layered possibilities in Davis's text with extremely creative uses of extended techniques, vocal melismas, theatricality, and aleatoric markings. The fundamental process of applying music over words can in itself layer meanings, oftentimes to enhance, but may equally complicate, the perceived meanings. In that respect, the flute frequently creates a shadow play effect, as I call it, alongside the vocalist, sometimes impersonating the singer's conscience, metaphorically speaking. This dramatic act not only reinforces the meaning implied in the words, but it embodies a sense of psychological vulnerability presented by the soprano. So these multi-layered meanings bring up works by, for example, composer Luciano Berio, which I'm sure we all know very well. Uh, Tom Service, in an article he wrote entitled A Guide to Luciano Berio's Music, said, quote, "It's typical Berio strategy of writing upon writing, building up layer upon layer of meanings, and refusing the idea that a single piece can exhaust the possibilities of its musical material." So coming back to the first page of Kate Soper's piece, um, looking at the dramatic use of her extended techniques, Soper pushes the limits of the performers, much like the sequenzas by Berio. The virtuosic demands of the sequenzas by Berio exploit an almost visceral experience for the performers. These virtuosic demands on the performers, in turn, evoke a highly theatrical performance for the audience. So the sequenza 1 for solo flute, uh, presented in the first version in 1958, uses proportional notation. And proportional notation is a compositional system using temporal measurements instead of rhythmic indications in the score. So as you can see here in the score, I've highlighted these uh, proportional notation in blue. In this case, it's specific seconds. So for the audience, part of the entertainment comes from observing and experiencing the theatrical tour de force of the performance. So this is music meant to be experienced live and in real time, not necessarily over a recording. The connection an audience builds with the agency of a performance, or with a work of art for that matter, is an interesting subject that remains as a prevalent topic in art history today. It impassioned the great thinkers of ancient Greece, which led to the flourishing era of the Italian Renaissance, and more specifically, the Italian opera genre. Opera quickly embraced the ideologies of Gesamtkunstwerk, a term coined in the early 19th century by the German philosopher Karl Trandorff, which roughly translates to universal artwork. Many modern day compositions, like Kate Soper's Ipse Dixit, stem from the ideals of Gesamtkunstwerk. Um, Other composers, like Karl Heinz Stockhausen, uses instrumental works in a very dramatic way, often using costumes, intricate choreographies, stage setups, lighting, to name a few. So there's an example of this on the left of Kathinka's Gesang. And more recently still, we have composers like Marcos Balter, um, who's very up and coming in New York as well. And he wrote a work entitled Pan, um, which is a 90 minutes musical drama for solo flute. And this was commissioned by the trailblazing flutist Claire Chase in her project of Density 2036. The work includes live electronics as well as the audience's participation, which is very interesting. And this conceptualizes the visceral experiences of the listener. So, Pan, the flute playing demigod from ancient Greek mythology, is inextricably prevalent in Soper's Only the Words, as well as many other works involving the flute, as we all know very well. Perceived as the god of theatrical criticism, Pan becomes a kind of metaphorical protagonist in Soper's Only the Words. But the abbreviated name Pan derives from the words panic. One could say that Pan's influence on the piece by Soper is reflected within the paranoia of one's own self criticisms, perceived judgments, conflicting inner voices, and also one's perceived sexuality. These are the underlying thoughts also in Lydia Davis's three texts, and it becomes Soper's impetus in her compositional process. So paranoia is also a form of duality. It's a sense of struggle that one might have within themselves. The concept of duality is the fundamental theme in all three movements of Soper's work. So coming to the music now and diving into the score, the first movement, entitled Go Away, depicts the fundamental theme of paranoia um, right from the beginning with this almost dyadic struggle, which I highlighted here in red. The extremely sectionalized first page shows the soprano struggling to speak the text, breaking out in melismatic arabesques or glissandi, emphasized by the extended techniques of the flute. This is what I call like a sonic texturizing effect on words, for example, words like near on, here we go, on the second page, measure 13, highlighted in purple, and also on words like soft here, highlighted in purple. Um, so the soprano, during these first three pages, she falls in and out of consciousness, if you will, um, sort of like these brief yet sudden moments of daydreaming. The writing in her daydreaming moments, like here highlighted in blue, and also up here in blue, um, the writing is very static and it only shifts from about a semitone from her reality moments when it's very active. The dramatically contrasting previous material, um, like here at near transitioning to not, is only a semitone away, but also harkens to this second movement that we're going to look at soon. Um, the D to D sharp semitone shift is also part of a larger chromatic progression, which I highlighted in yellow over the first three pages. The progression builds from an A natural, uh, no, there we go. So this is back to the first page. So it starts from the A natural of the soprano up here and gradually progresses chromatically ascending, um, or all the way to the A natural of the flute, which ends the first section of the first movement. So this sort of chromatic ascending line kind of presents this dichotomy between tonality and atonality, the sense that we have a full standard chromatic line, but within a myriad of gestures and effects of extended techniques. So this is the barrio strategy, if you will, which I previously mentioned. It's the dilemma of the multi-layered meaning and the concept that works of art do not always, as Lydia Davis said, mean what they say. The concluding statement down here, the bottom of the page, um, is the transition into the second movement. And it presents a really cool, really innovative effect, extended techniques, which is almost like a ventriloquist effect, which you'll notice in the recording, where the soprano will mouth the words in some cases, but not speak the words, and the flutist speaks the words. Um, it's especially creepy when it's a male flute player with the soprano, and suddenly you have like the male voice whispering. So this is a moment where also where the flute and the soprano, they finally unite in a like-minded inner voice. And the audience should also not really know where the voice is coming from. The performers remain completely immobile, as if time is standing still. And this transitions nicely into the second movement entitled Head, Heart. So these are two words that obviously have similar spelling, and yet they share really extreme opposites in their symbolic references. So this movement represents the duality between the intellectual mind brain versus the emotional soul. Soper uses Lydia Davis's text in a form of dialogue between head and heart, almost as if head and heart um, were both humans speaking to each other. The sections representing head are set over the bass flute's sounds, the otherworldly sounds of the harmonic spectrum, as seen in blue highlighting. The harmonics on a bass flute especially brings out like a kind of feeling of peace and stability. By contrast, the sections representing heart become unstable as the bass flute texture shifts towards these unsettling tremolos, as you can see highlighted in pink at the bottom of the page. the word heart uh, comes in on this breathy tremolo, and this harkens back to this Monteverdi trill, which is a very expressive tool, um, showcasing someone's kind of emotions. And this is imitated by both the soprano and the bass flute. So this second movement is also similar to the first movement in the sense that it builds chromatically, starting on a D flat that I've highlighted in yellow, going to D natural, and then the sound world of E flat, all the way to E natural. And the climax of the whole movement, the movement builds. So this is a way of building tension and building a longer line. And then the climax arrives on this high D of the E spectrum in both the bass flute and the soprano. And and then it quickly de-escalates back down to the harmonic spectrum of C natural. So in this final spectrum, the bass flute's opposing textures between head and heart, as you can see at the bottom of the page, they now unite together. So this is head and heart sort of like agreeing and finally coming together as one. And it, um, by combining, as you can see, the tremolo effects and the harmonic spectrum and the tremolo effects of the Monteverdi trill. But of course, art is not always so serious. And Kate Soper definitely brings a lot of humor in her works, not just in this work, but in general in all of her works. And the third movement here, as you see, getting to know your body, is no exception. So Soper plays off of Davis's short but really quirky text. And I'd like to just read you the text um, just to realize how it's very funny. So here's the text. If your eyeballs move, this means that you're thinking or about to start thinking. If you don't want to be thinking at this particular moment, try to keep your eyeballs still. So this text is interspersed in moments where the performers seem to like just go unhinged and lose complete control, as you can see in the third bar and then in the sixth bar and so on. So this is the kind of like the, oh, I lost my page. Going back. So this is like the ironic dilemma of attempting to stop thinking, but by trying to do so, you just overwhelm yourself in endless thoughts. It's a conceptual representation of the chattering mind, um, which, as you can see on this page here. So in this movement, of course, the flutist now switches to the piccolo and plays the role of what Kate Soper had called the Iron Man suit of the soprano. Um, and so going back to Aristotle's art of mimesis or imitation, Soper puts a spin on that concept and has the soprano literally imitate the piccolo. So an example of this on page 12, measure 32 here. At this point, the soprano is following the line of the piccolo. So it almost seems like the soprano is just talking gibberish and as she imitates. And I mean, is this maybe an attempt of like talking over one's endless chattering mind? I mean, maybe. It's a fun concept. But these really humorous effects, they do bring us back to ideas of, like, for example, Stockhausen and his piece entitled Zungenspitzentanz, or Tip of the Tongue Dance for Solo Piccolo, which comes from his larger opera, uh, Samstag aus Licht, um, So the ending of the movement, of this third movement, is particularly impactful throughout the piece. Because at this point, the soprano and the piccolo, as you can see, well, starting beforehand, the top of the page, but especially at measure 40 becomes apparent. They sort of unite into one and create this almost like hilarious mechanical glitch until the very end. And of course, they're doing so while keeping their eyeballs still, of course. So it's interesting to note that amidst all of this chaos, the chaos of all of the movements, but especially of this third movement here, um, arriving at this last page, Soper basically chooses silence to end the whole work. She uses silence as her concluding statement. And indeed, silence is very powerful. So as you can see, there's these breaks in between the statements, and these breaks get significantly longer until the very end of the whole piece, where the performers have to hold for at least 5 seconds. So this kind of makes me think as well of composers like John Cage, which I mean we've all heard of, and the impact of silence that one can have on the audience. The anticipation and the curiosity and the hyper awareness, not only from the performers, but experienced by the audience during these silences are almost palpable. It's a really dramatic effect, and this is what concludes the whole second section of Ipse Dixit. So it really leaves the audience on the edge of their seats. This is another image of the performance in action. So that was a brief overview of the three movements and of the piece. Um, and what Kate Soper is questioning the responses of defining art itself. So Ipse Dixit is a work that's rooted in these sort of idealisms of Gesamtkunstwerk, with a rich and diverse palette of different compositional styles and techniques that are reflected in the construction. And so therefore Soper sort of abides to all the rules of producing a work of art, a good work of art, if you will, while simultaneously questioning its systemic behavior. Her work, like I said, explores the intersections between art, language, and meaning to question what is beneath the surface in a quest for the hidden truth. It seems that art oftentimes can be two-faced, and Kate Soper brings to light this dyadic fundamental component in her work. So before moving on to my recording, so I'm going to have to stop the screen share and then I'll restart the screen share with the video recording. So I'll go ahead and stop the screen share now. Okay, great. So before I go on to the video, I just want to say another thank you to Noelle McMurtry, the soprano who you'll hear on the recording, to Ben Giroux, who was the recording engineer, and also to Christian Lane from Emmanuel Episcopal Church in Baltimore, whom they let us graciously use the sanctuary of the church to do this recording. So we had a little fun with the videos. We sort of made it our own, but still respecting what Kate had in mind in the score. So the piece itself is about 13 minutes in length, and after the video, if anyone had any questions, of course, I'm more than happy to answer. So without further ado, I will now share the screen again, this time with the video. Okay, so that should be sharing now. And so here is Kate Soper's Only the Words Themselves Mean What They Say.
When he says, go away and don't come. You are hurt by the words, even though you know he does not mean what I say. Or rather, you think he probably means, go away, because he is so angry with you. He does not want you anywhere near him right now. Although, you are quite sure he does want you to stay away. He must want you to back, either soon or later, depending on how quickly he may grow less angry during the time you are away. How he may remember other less angry feelings he often has for you that may soften his anger now. But though he does mean go away, he does not mean it. But though he does mean go away, he does not mean it. But though he does mean go away, he does not mean it as much as he means that the words have in them. As he also means that in the words come back. He means all the anger meant by someone who says such words, and means
What words say?
that you should not come back ever. He means most of the anger meant by such a person. For if he meant all the anger, he would also mean what the words watch themselves say. That you should not come back ever. But being angry, if he were merely to say, I'm very angry at you, you would not be as hurt as you are. Or you would not be hurt at all, even though the degree of anger, if it could be measured, might be exactly the same. Or perhaps it could be the same. But the anger would have to be of a different kind. A kind that could be shared as a problem, whereas this kind can only be told in these words he does not mean. So, it is not the in the words that hurts you, but the fact that he chooses to say words to you that mean you should never come back. Even though he does not mean even though only
The words themselves mean what they say.
getting to know your body. When your eyeballs move, this means that you're thinking, or about to start thinking. particular moment. Try to keep your eyeballs still.
And so that was Kate Soper's Only the Words Themselves Mean What They Say. So thank you. Thank you for watching, listening, and if anyone had anything, any comments, any questions, anything they'd like to add, feel free to unmute. Well, great. I do want to say, I mean, this would be a wonderful piece in person. This is the kind of work, like I had mentioned with the Barrio Sequenzas and Stockhausen, that when you experience this live and the energy in the room, totally different experience. But you know, we're all in this pandemic together, but getting through this. Yeah, Rama.
Hi,
Hi.
thank you so much. This was a terrific presentation.
Thank
Really
you.
quite enjoyed it. Right before I ask, I thought I'll quickly introduce myself. I'm Rama. I'm calling from Holland, and I was lucky enough to perform this piece a couple of years. The first movement of this piece a couple of years ago at the Banff program. That was unfortunately I could only perform the first movement, but I really appreciated your comments on Aristotle and how this piece fits into the larger spectrum of works coming after the new complexity. And I did want to ask you to elaborate a little more on what you called the layered meaning dilemma.
Yeah. So it is a little vague, and that's the whole point. It's when I say layered meaning, and this is what kind of stems from in the text of Lydia Davis, but then uh, so for example, if you look at Go Away, um, it's sort of this questioning of like go away. What does he mean it like is he angry, or is he or she angry, or in this case it's he. Is he angry, or is he you know sad, or is he impatient, or like what it's what is the meaning of going away? What does it imply, you know? Is it, am I making a big deal of overthinking about it, or is it a big deal? Like that's what kind of what Lydia Davis is doing, and it's sort of like taking a glimpse of someone's like own inner mind. And so Kate Soper dives into that and then adds music on top of that. And so when you add music on top of text, you start to either emphasize what the text might be saying directly, or you could start to blur the lines. Um, I mean, if you take, for example, I mean, Schubert and Hugo Wolf did this a lot. If you take their leader, sometimes you have a text that is considered quite sad, you know, to generalize it. But then Schubert will all of a sudden turn it into a major key. So then that text almost becomes not so much sad, but starts to be interpreted as nostalgic or hopeful.
Or in the case of Elkanich, the speech of the Elf King becomes downright creepy now that it's in a major
Yeah,
key.
exactly. So that's what I meant with the music can either emphasize what the text
Mm.
is saying, or it can start to change meanings. And so Soper does that uh, a lot, especially with the first movement you said you played. Um,
Mhm.
she also adds certain words and expressions, like these kind of like
Right.
it's that those are not obviously not in the text, but they'll start to emphasize either panic or anger. Um, she'll change around, and then things like when I talked about the sonic texturizing, which I think is a wonderful technique she's doing, she'll suddenly, the text might just be quite standard in terms of a certain emotion, but then Kate Soper will just flip it on a dime, and suddenly you go with the register, the colors, the dynamics, and of course the extended techniques. If it's the flute starts to flutter tongue or tremolo, we just enter into a completely different sound world. And that's what I was saying about the daydreaming. It's like the soprano is panicking and questioning about going away. Like, go, what did he mean by go away? But like, is it because he's remember, and then she, like, on remember, it's like, is it because he remember, like, she starts to remember
Right.
what less angry feelings he often had.
Right. And daydreamy is such a perfect word to use for it, considering it's Lydia Davis and she has these big serpentine sinuous sentences. Davis, by the way, is she has terrific translations of Proust, who uses the same kinds of sentences in Search for Lost Time. That's a really cool connection too. Anyway, I'll stop talking. Thank you so much.
No, thank you. This is wonderful. Thanks for bringing up those comments. Great. Well, I guess on that note, thanks again, guys. This was fun. And so enjoy the rest of the festival, the flute fair, even though it's on Zoom. Okay,
Thanks so much. See you.
thank you.